The woman stumbled into Oatman, Arizona on a blistering July afternoon in 1883. Her dress torn and dusty, a crying infant pressed against her chest, and desperation written across every line of her exhausted face. Kade Yancy looked up from shoeing a mare outside the livery stable. His hammer paused mid-swing as he watched her collapse against the water trough at the edge of Main Street. The baby wailed louder, and without thinking, Kade dropped his tools and crossed the distance between them in long strides. Up close, he could see she was young, maybe 22 or 23, with dark hair escaping from what had once been a careful bun and eyes the color of storm clouds. "Madam," he said, his voice low and steady as he crouched beside her, "let me help you." She looked up at him with such fear that it stopped his heart for a moment. Her arms tightened around the baby, pulling the child closer as if Kade might snatch him away. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracked and dry. "I just need water, then I will keep moving." "You are not going anywhere in this condition," Kade said firmly. He reached for the dipper hanging beside the trough, filled it with cool water and held it out to her. "Drink first, then we will figure out what comes next." The woman stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because she took the dipper with a trembling hand and drank deeply. Water spilled down her chin, but she did not seem to care. When she finished, she wet her fingers and dabbed them against the baby's lips. The infant, who could not have been more than 4 months old, stopped crying and sucked at the moisture eagerly. "Thank you," she said, her voice stronger now. "I am Marcy Malone. This is my son, Thomas." "Kade Yancy," he replied. "Are you running from something, Mrs. Malone?" Her face went pale, and he knew he had struck the truth. "It is Miss Malone," she said quietly. "And yes, but I would rather not speak of it here in the open." Kade glanced around. Several townspeople had paused to watch the scene unfold. Mrs. Henderson from the general store stood in her doorway, hands on her hips, her expression a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Old Pete, the prospector who spent more time drunk than sober, leaned against a post outside the saloon, watching with rheumy eyes. In a town like Oatman, gossip spread faster than wildfire in dry grass. "Can you stand?" Kade asked. Marcy nodded, and he helped her to her feet. She swayed slightly, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. The baby had started to fuss again, and Kade could see the exhaustion in every line of her body. Whatever had brought her to Oatman, she had been traveling hard and fast. "My place is just up the street," Kade said. "It is not much, but it is clean and private. You can rest there while we sort things out." "I cannot impose," Marcy protested weakly. "You are not imposing. I am offering." Kade kept his voice gentle but firm. "Come on. You look like you are about to fall over, and that baby needs proper care." Marcy hesitated only a moment longer before nodding. Kade led her past the curious onlookers, ignoring their stares. His house sat at the edge of town, a simple wooden structure he had built himself 3 years ago when he had decided to settle in Oatman. It was not fancy, just 2 rooms and a small kitchen, but it was sturdy and kept out the worst of the desert heat. Inside, he settled Marcy into the only comfortable chair he owned, a worn leather piece he had bought off a prospector heading back east. She sank into it with a sigh of relief, adjusting Thomas in her arms. The baby had fallen asleep, his tiny face peaceful now. "When did you last eat?" Kade asked, moving to the kitchen area. "Yesterday morning," Marcy admitted. "I had a little bread and cheese, but it ran out." Kade muttered something under his breath and began pulling out supplies. He was not much of a cook, but he could manage basic meals. Within minutes, he had bread, cold chicken left over from the night before, and cheese laid out on the table. He poured water from the pitcher into a clean glass and brought everything to Marcy. "Eat," he commanded. "Slowly, though. Your stomach will not thank you if you rush it." Marcy ate with the careful control of someone who was starving but knew better than to make herself sick. Between bites, she nursed Thomas, who had woken and demanded attention. Kade busied himself tidying up, giving her privacy and time to compose herself. When she had finished eating, some color had returned to her cheeks. "You want to tell me what you are running from?" Kade asked, pulling up a wooden chair and sitting across from her. Marcy looked down at Thomas, her expression a mixture of love and sorrow. "His father," she said quietly. "Thomas's father, Robert Thornhill." The name meant nothing to Kade. "Is he your husband?" "No." Marcy's voice was barely above a whisper. "He promised to marry me. We were engaged, and I believed him when he said we would have a proper wedding. But after I told him I was carrying his child, everything changed. He said I had trapped him, that he never intended to actually go through with it. He gave me money and told me to get rid of the baby or leave town." Kade felt anger building in his chest, hot and fierce. "And you left." "I could not get rid of him," Marcy said, looking at Thomas with such tenderness that it made Kade's heart ache. "He is innocent in all this. So yes, I left. I went to Santa Fe to my aunt's house, and I had Thomas there. My aunt helped me for a while, but she is old and struggling herself. She could not support us both. I thought I could find work, but no one wants to hire an unmarried mother. The Women's Aid Society suggested I give Thomas to an orphanage, but I could not do that either." "So you came here," Kade said. "Robert found out where I was," Marcy explained, her voice shaking slightly. "He sent men to my aunt's house. They said he wanted his son back. That if he was going to have a bastard, at least the boy could grow up with his name. But he did not want me, just Thomas." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "I will not let him take my baby. I will not let Thomas grow up thinking his mother abandoned him. So I ran. I took what little money I had and I ran." Kade reached across and gently took one of her hands. "You are safe here," he said firmly. "I give you my word. Whatever happens, I will not let anyone take that baby from you." Marcy looked at him with such hope and disbelief that it nearly broke him. "Why would you help me? You do not even know me." "Because it is the right thing to do," Kade said simply. "And because I know what it is like to be alone in the world with no one to turn to." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound Thomas's soft breathing. Finally, Marcy spoke again. "I cannot stay here forever. Robert has money and connections. He will keep looking for me. Then we will figure something out," Kade said. "But for now you need rest. Take my bed, I will sleep out here." "I cannot take your bed," Marcy protested. "You can and you will," Kade said, his tone brooking no argument. "You are exhausted and that baby needs you to be strong, so rest. We will talk more tomorrow." Marcy looked like she wanted to argue further, but exhaustion won out. She nodded and let Kade show her to the bedroom. He left her there, closing the door to give her privacy, and returned to the main room. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and purple. Kade sat in his chair and tried to make sense of what had just happened. He was a simple man, a blacksmith and farrier who had come to Oatman looking for a quiet life after years of drifting from town to town. He had no family, no ties to anyone. His mother had died when he was 12, and his father had drunk himself to death 2 years later. Kade had been on his own ever since, learning his trade from whoever would teach him and moving on when it suited him. He was 28 now, and he had thought he had seen most of what life had to offer. But nothing had prepared him for the feeling that had struck him when he saw Marcy collapse by that water trough. It was not just sympathy or pity. It was something deeper, something that made him want to protect her and that baby with everything he had. The next morning, Kade woke to the sound of Thomas crying. He had spent an uncomfortable night in the chair, but he had slept worse in his time. He stood and stretched, working the kinks out of his back, and went to start coffee. Marcy emerged from the bedroom a few minutes later, looking better rested but still worn. "Good morning," she said quietly. "I am sorry Thomas woke you." "I was already awake," Kade lied. "Coffee, please." Marcy settled into the chair with Thomas, rocking him gently. The baby quieted, his big eyes focusing on Kade with that intense stare infants had. Kade poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to Marcy. She took it gratefully, sipping carefully. "I have been thinking," Kade said, sitting down. "If you want to stay in Oatman, people are going to talk. An unmarried woman with a baby staying at my house. It will cause a scandal." Marcy's face fell. "I understand. I will leave today. You have already done more than I had any right to ask." "That is not what I meant," Kade interrupted. "I mean, if you want to stay, we need to give people a different story." "What kind of story?" Marcy asked warily. Kade took a breath, hardly believing what he was about to suggest. "We tell them you are my wife, that we got married somewhere else and came here to start fresh. It would explain everything, and it would protect you and Thomas from gossip." Marcy stared at him, her coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. "You want to pretend to be married to me?" "More than pretend," Kade said. "If Robert is really looking for you, he will be searching for Marcy Malone, an unmarried woman with a baby. He will not be looking for Mrs. Marcy Yancy, wife of a blacksmith in a small Arizona town." "But that is fraud," Marcy said, though her voice lacked conviction. "It is lying." "It is protection," Kade countered. "Look, I am not saying it is perfect, but it would keep you safe. Keep Thomas safe. We could make it legal if you wanted. There is a preacher who comes through Oatman every few months. We could have a proper ceremony." Marcy set her coffee cup down, her hands shaking slightly. "Why would you do this for me? I am a stranger. I come with another man's child and nothing but trouble following me." Kade met her eyes steadily. "Maybe because I think everyone deserves a chance to start over. Maybe because I am tired of being alone. Or maybe I just think it is the right thing to do." "Does the reason matter?" "It matters to me," Marcy said softly. "I need to know this is not some kind of trick, that you are not going to turn around in a week and demand something from me that I cannot give." "I do not want anything from you except your trust," Kade said. "And maybe your friendship in time. This does not have to be a real marriage in every sense, just a legal one. A protection for you and Thomas. I have an extra room I can build onto the house. We can keep our own spaces." Marcy looked down at Thomas, who had fallen asleep in her arms again. Kade could see the war playing out across her face, hope battling with fear and distrust. Finally, she looked back up at him. "If we do this, I want to be clear about something. I will not be your servant. I will help around the house and I will contribute however I can, but I will not be treated like property." "I would never expect that," Kade said firmly. "This would be a partnership. We help each other, that is all." Marcy took a deep breath. "Then yes, I accept your offer." "God help me, I accept." Kade felt something loosen in his chest, something he had not even realized was tight. "Then we are agreed. As far as anyone in this town is concerned, we got married in Santa Fe 3 months ago. Thomas is yours from a previous relationship, and I have accepted him as my own. We came here looking for a fresh start. And when people ask questions," Marcy said, "because they will ask questions, we tell them it is private family business and leave it at that," Kade said. "This is the West. People do not pry too much if you make it clear you do not want to talk about something." Over the next few days, Kade and Marcy worked out the details of their story and began the process of making their arrangement believable. Kade went to the general store and bought supplies for a woman and baby, trying not to notice Mrs. Henderson's raised eyebrows. He introduced Marcy around town as his wife, enduring the curious looks and pointed questions with a patient smile. Most people seemed willing to accept the story at face value, though there was plenty of gossip. Kade heard whispers when he walked down the street, saw the way some of the women looked at Marcy with judgment in their eyes. But there were kind people too. Doc Miller, who served as the town's physician and dentist, stopped by to check on Thomas and pronounce him healthy. Sarah Webb, who ran the boarding house, brought over a basket of baked goods and offered to help if Marcy needed anything. "Town can be harsh on newcomers," Sarah said quietly when Kade answered the door. "But you seem like good people. Do not let the gossips get you down." Marcy was overwhelmed by the kindness. "I do not know what to say," she told Kade that evening after Sarah had left. "I expected everyone to be cruel. People are complicated," Kade said. "Some of them are judgmental, sure, but most folks out here understand that everyone has a past. We are all running from something or looking for something. That is what the West is about." As the days turned into weeks, Kade and Marcy settled into a routine. Kade worked at the livery during the day, shoeing horses and doing metal work for the miners who still scratched a living from the hills around Oatman. Marcy kept house, taking care of Thomas and gradually regaining her strength. In the evenings, they would sit together and talk, sharing stories about their lives. Kade learned that Marcy had grown up in St. Louis, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a seamstress. She had been educated beyond what was common for women of her class, able to read and write fluently, and possessed of a sharp mind for numbers. Robert Thornhill had been the son of a wealthy merchant, charming and attentive during their courtship. It was only after she became pregnant that his true nature had revealed itself. "I was so foolish," Marcy said one evening, her voice thick with regret. "I thought I loved him. I thought he loved me." "You were not foolish," Kade said firmly. "He was a liar and a coward. That is not your fault." Marcy gave him a sad smile. "You are kind to say so, but I should have been more careful. I should have waited for marriage." "What is done, Kade said. "And honestly, I cannot bring myself to regret it entirely. If things had gone differently, you would not be here. Thomas would not be here, and I would still be alone." It was the closest Kade had come to admitting how much their presence had changed his life. He had grown attached to both Marcy and Thomas in a way that surprised him. He looked forward to coming home each evening, to finding Marcy cooking dinner or tending to Thomas. He loved the sound of the baby's laughter, the way Thomas would reach for him with chubby hands when he walked in the door. One night, about 6 weeks after Marcy had arrived, Kade woke to the sound of Thomas crying. It was not unusual. The baby still woke frequently during the night. What was unusual was the sound that followed, Marcy crying too. Kade got up and knocked softly on her door. "Marcy, are you all right?" There was silence, then a muffled, "Yes, I am fine. Go back to sleep." But Kade could hear the tears in her voice, and he could not bring himself to walk away. "I am coming in," he said, giving her a moment's warning before pushing open the door. Marcy sat on the bed, Thomas in her arms, tears streaming down her face. "I am sorry," she said, wiping at her eyes. "I did not mean to wake you." "What is wrong?" Kade asked, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "Nothing. Everything." Marcy laughed, but it was a broken sound. "I just keep thinking about what my life has become. A few months ago, I thought I had everything figured out. And now I am here, living a lie, dependent on the charity of a man who owes me nothing. What kind of life is this for Thomas? What kind of mother am I?" "You are the best kind of mother," Kade said firmly. "You gave up everything to protect your son. You traveled across dangerous territory with almost no money and no help. You are brave and strong, and Thomas is lucky to have you." "But he deserves more," Marcy whispered. "He deserves a real father, a real family, not this pretend arrangement." Kade felt something shift in his chest, a realization that had been building for weeks finally crystallizing into clarity. "What if it was not pretend?" he said quietly. Marcy looked up at him, her eyes wide. "What?" "What if we made this real?" Kade said. "What if we actually got married properly? What if I became Thomas's father in every sense that matters?" "Kade, you do not have to do this," Marcy said, shaking her head. "You have already done so much." "I am not doing this out of obligation," Kade said. He reached out and gently took her hand. "Marcy, these past weeks with you and Thomas have been the happiest of my life. I wake up excited to come home. I find myself thinking about you during the day, wondering if you need anything, hoping you are happy. I look at Thomas and I feel like he is already mine, not because I have to, but because I want him to be." "You cannot possibly mean that," Marcy said, but there was hope in her voice. "I do mean it," Kade said. "I am not good with fancy words and I cannot promise you a life of luxury. But I can promise that I will take care of you and Thomas. I can promise that I will work hard to make you happy. And I can promise that when I say Thomas is ours, I mean it with everything I am." Marcy was crying again, but these tears were different. "I do not deserve you," she whispered. "You deserve everything good in this world," Kade said. "So what do you say? Will you marry me for real? Will you let me be Thomas's father?" Marcy looked down at the baby in her arms, then back up at Kade. "Yes," she said, her voice strong despite the tears. "Yes, I will marry you." Kade felt a smile spread across his face, wider than any smile he could remember. He leaned forward and very carefully pressed a kiss to Marcy's forehead. "Thank you," he said simply. They sat together in the quiet of the night, Thomas sleeping peacefully between them, and Kade felt something he had not felt in years. Hope. The preacher came through Oatman 2 weeks later, a circuit rider named Josiah Hart, who ministered to the scattered communities throughout the territory. He was a weathered man with kind eyes and a voice that carried the weight of genuine faith. When Kade approached him about performing a marriage ceremony, Reverend Hart agreed without hesitation. "I always love a wedding," he said, clasping Kade's hand warmly. "Brings a bit of joy to these hard lands." The ceremony was simple, held in the small church building that served the Protestant congregation in Oatman. Sarah Webb stood as witness, along with Doc Miller. Marcy wore a dress that Sarah had helped her make, a simple blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. Kade wore his best clothes, which were not much, but Marcy told him he looked handsome and he chose to believe her. As they stood before Reverend Hart, Kade held Marcy's hands and looked into her eyes. He had been nervous all morning, worried that she might change her mind or that he would somehow fail her. But when he saw the trust and affection in her gaze, his fears melted away. "Do you, Kade Yancy, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Reverend Hart intoned. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Kade said, his voice steady and sure. "And do you, Marcy Malone, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Marcy's eyes glistened with tears, but her voice was clear. "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona and the grace of God, I pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Hart said with a smile. "Kade, you may kiss your bride." Kade leaned in slowly, giving Marcy every chance to pull away if she wanted to, but she did not pull away. She met him halfway, and their lips touched in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. It was Kade's first kiss, a fact he had been too embarrassed to tell Marcy, but somehow it felt perfect, like everything in his life had been leading to this moment. When they pulled apart, Sarah was crying happy tears and even Doc Miller looked misty-eyed. Thomas, who Sarah had been holding during the ceremony, let out a gurgle that sounded almost like approval, making everyone laugh. "Welcome to married life," Sarah said, hugging them both. "May you have many happy years together." That night, Kade and Marcy returned to their house as husband and wife. There was an awkwardness between them that had not been there before, a awareness of what marriage typically meant. Kade had already told Marcy that he would not expect anything from her, that they could take things as slowly as she needed. But as they stood in the main room of their home, Marcy reached out and took his hand. "I am grateful for you," she said softly, "for your patience and your kindness. I know this is not a typical marriage, but I want you to know that I am committed to making it work, to making us work." "So am I," Kade said. "We will figure it out together." They did figure it out day by day. The physical relationship between them developed slowly, naturally, built on a foundation of trust and genuine affection. Kade was patient, never pushing, always making sure Marcy felt safe and cherished. And Marcy, for her part, began to heal from the wounds Robert had left on her heart. She learned to trust again, to believe that a man could be kind without expecting something in return. 3 months after their wedding, Marcy told Kade she loved him. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, Thomas playing with wooden blocks Kade had carved at their feet. The words came out simply, without fanfare, but they hit Kade with the force of a lightning strike. "I love you too," he said, pulling her close. "I have loved you for a while now. I was just afraid to say it." "Why afraid?" Marcy asked, tilting her head to look up at him. "Because I did not want to pressure you," Kade admitted. "I wanted you to come to love me on your own if you ever did. I did not want you to feel obligated." Marcy reached up and cupped his face with her hand. "Kade Yancy, you are the best man I have ever known. I do not feel obligated. I feel blessed." Life in Oatman settled into a comfortable rhythm. Kade's blacksmith business thrived, and Marcy started taking in sewing work, using the skills her mother had taught her. Thomas grew from an infant into a toddler, bright and curious and full of energy. He took his first steps in their kitchen, lurching from Marcy's arms to Kade's with a delighted laugh. His first word was "Papa," directed at Kade, and Kade had to turn away to hide the tears in his eyes. But their peace was not to last forever. One afternoon in the spring of 1884, about 9 months after Marcy had first arrived in Oatman, a stranger rode into town. He was well dressed, out of place among the miners and cowboys who usually frequented the area. Kade was working at the livery when the man approached. "I am looking for information," the stranger said, his voice smooth and educated. "I am trying to locate a woman. Her name is Marcy Malone. She may be traveling with an infant." Kade felt ice run through his veins, but he kept his expression neutral. "Malone, cannot say I know anyone by that name." "What is this about?" "Private business," the man said, "but it is important that I find her. There is a reward for information leading to her whereabouts." "Sorry, cannot help you," Kade said, turning back to his work. "Try asking at the general store. Mrs. Henderson knows everyone who comes through town." The stranger tipped his hat and left, but Kade knew this was serious. He finished up his work as quickly as he could and headed home, his mind racing. When he walked through the door, Marcy took one look at his face and went pale. "What happened?" she asked. "There is a man in town looking for Marcy Malone and her baby," Kade said without preamble. "He is offering a reward for information." Marcy sank into a chair, her hand going to her throat. "Robert found me." "Maybe," Kade said. "Or maybe this is just someone asking questions at random. But we need to be careful." Over the next few days, the stranger asked questions around town, but Kade and Marcy's story held up. Everyone in Oatman knew them as a married couple, knew Thomas as their son. The marriage certificate Reverend Hart had filed was legal and legitimate. There was no Marcy Malone in Oatman, only Marcy Yancy, and no one thought to connect the two. The stranger left after a week, frustrated and empty-handed. But the incident shook Marcy badly. She became nervous, jumping at shadows, constantly worried that someone would come and take Thomas away. "He will not give up," she said to Kade one night, her voice thick with fear. "Robert does not like to be defied. He will keep looking." "Then we will keep protecting you," Kade said firmly. "Marcy, you are my wife. Thomas is my son. That is not pretend anymore. That is the truth, legal and binding. Even if Robert found you, even if he figured out where you are, he has no claim on Thomas. I am listed as his father on all legal documents now. I have adopted him properly." "But Robert could claim you stole his son," Marcy argued. "Let him try," Kade said. "He would have to prove paternity, and he would have to explain why he let his alleged son leave with an unmarried woman in the first place. And even if he could prove all that, he would have to get a judge to rule in his favor. Out here, judges tend to favor the people who are actually raising the children over wealthy, absent fathers." Marcy wanted to believe him, but the fear did not leave her eyes. Kade held her close that night, wishing he could take her fear away, but knowing that only time would heal those wounds. Time did help. Months passed with no further sign of strangers asking questions. Thomas continued to grow, and Marcy slowly relaxed again. She and Kade grew closer, their marriage becoming everything a marriage should be. They laughed together, worked together, supported each other through the hardships of frontier life. In the fall of 1884, Marcy discovered she was pregnant again. She was terrified to tell Kade, afraid he would feel trapped or resentful. But when she finally worked up the courage to share the news, his reaction was nothing like she feared. "Another baby," he said, his face lighting up with pure joy. "Marcy, that is wonderful. You are not upset?" she asked. "Why would I be upset?" Kade asked, pulling her into his arms. "I love Thomas like he is my own. I will love this baby the same way. We are a family, Marcy. A real family." Their daughter was born in May of 1885, a healthy baby girl with Kade's dark hair and Marcy's eyes. They named her Emma, and Kade fell in love with her the moment he held her. Thomas, now almost 2, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything. "Gentle," Marcy would remind him as he patted Emma's head with chubby hands. "She is very small." "Baby," Thomas would say seriously, as if this explained everything. Life was good, better than good. Kade sometimes had to pinch himself to believe this was his reality. He had a wife he loved, 2 beautiful children, and a successful business. The house had grown too, with the extra room he had promised to build plus another for the children. It was not fancy, but it was filled with warmth and love. But the past has a way of catching up with people. And in the summer of 1886, it caught up with Marcy. She was at the general store with Thomas and Emma when a woman walked in. Marcy looked up from examining fabric and found herself face to face with Catherine Thornhill, Robert's sister. For a moment, they both froze. "Marcy Malone," Catherine said, her voice sharp with shock. "I cannot believe it is really you." "My name is Yancy now," Marcy said, her voice shaking slightly. "Marcy Yancy." Catherine's eyes dropped to Thomas, who stood beside Marcy holding her skirt, then to Emma in her arms. Her expression hardened. "So it is true. You did keep the baby, and you have another one now, I see. How very productive you have been." Marcy felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she lifted her chin. "These are my children, Thomas and Emma, and yes, I kept my son because he is mine." "Robert has been looking for you," Catherine said. "He wants his son back." "Thomas is not his son," Marcy said firmly. "Not in any way that matters. He has a father, a real father who loves him and takes care of him." "You mean you found some fool to take you and your bastard in," Catherine said coldly. How convenient for you, Mrs. Henderson, who had been pretending not to listen, cleared her throat loudly. Mrs. Yancey is a customer in my store, she said, her voice firm. I will thank you to speak respectfully or take your business elsewhere. Catherine looked surprised, as if she had not expected anyone to defend Marcy. She gathered herself and turned back to Marcy. Robert will be very interested to hear that I found you. I am staying at the boarding house. I suggest you come speak with me before I send word to him. I have nothing to say to Robert, Marcy said. Now, if you will excuse me, I need to finish my shopping. She turned away, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it. Thomas sensed her distress and pressed closer to her side. Emma began to fuss, picking up on her mother's tension. Marcy quickly paid for her purchases and left the store, her mind reeling. She went straight home and told Kade everything. He listened calmly, his expression growing more serious as she spoke. She said she is staying at the boarding house, Marcy finished. Kade, what if she tells Robert where we are? What if he comes here? Then we deal with it, Kade said. Marcy, we have done nothing wrong. You are my wife. Thomas is my son, legally adopted. Robert Thornhill has no claim on him. But Catherine seemed so certain, Marcy said. Catherine can think whatever she wants, Kade said. Let her send word to her brother. Let him come if he wants to. We will face this together. But Kade was not content to just wait. That evening he went to the boarding house and asked to speak with Catherine Thornhill. Sarah Webb showed him to the small parlor where Catherine sat with a book. Mr. Yancey, I presume, Catherine said, looking him over with barely concealed disdain. The blacksmith who married my brother's former mistress. I am the man who married Marcy Malone and adopted her son, Kade said evenly. And I am here to make something very clear to you. Thomas is my son now. He has been for 2 years. He does not know any other father and he never will. Robert has rights, Catherine said. No, he does not, Kade said. He gave up any rights he might have had when he abandoned a pregnant woman and told her to get rid of his child. He made his choice. Now he has to live with it. Robert regrets his actions, Catherine said. He wants to make amends. He wants to do right by his son. If he wanted to do right by his son, he would leave him alone, Kade said. Thomas is happy. He is loved. He has a mother and a father who would die for him. What exactly does Robert think he can offer that is better than that? Catherine was silent for a moment. Money, she finally said. Security. A name that means something. Education. Opportunities. And what about love? Kade asked. What about being there every day, not just when it is convenient? What about changing diapers and soothing nightmares and teaching him to ride a horse? Those are the things that make a father, Mrs. Thornhill, not money or a fancy name. You are a simple man, Catherine said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. You cannot possibly understand what Robert can provide. I understand that I am the one who has been there, Kade said. I am the one Thomas calls Papa. And I am the one who will protect him from anyone who tries to take him away from the only family he has ever known. Even if that someone is Robert Thornhill. Kade left the boarding house feeling slightly better. He had made his position clear. Now it was up to Catherine to decide what to do with that information. Catherine stayed in Oatman for 3 more days. During that time, she watched Marcy and Kade with their children. She saw the way Thomas ran to Kade when he came home from work, the way the boy's face lit up at the sight of his father. She saw the way Marcy and Kade looked at each other, with genuine affection and respect. She saw a family, whole and happy and functioning. On the morning she was scheduled to leave, Catherine stopped by Kade and Marcy's house. Marcy answered the door, Emma on her hip, and stiffened when she saw who it was. I am not here to cause trouble, Catherine said quickly. May I come in? Marcy hesitated, then stepped aside. Catherine entered and looked around the modest but clean home. Thomas was playing with blocks in the corner, building a tower with serious concentration. "I wanted to apologize," Catherine said, the words clearly difficult for her. "I was wrong to speak to you the way I did at the store. I was shocked to see you and I reacted badly." "Thank you," Marcy said cautiously. Catherine watched Thomas for a moment. "He looks happy." "He is happy," Marcy said. "He is loved." "I can see that," Catherine said. She turned back to Marcy. "I am going to tell Robert that I could not find you, that the trail went cold in Santa Fe." Marcy felt tears spring to her eyes. "Why would you do that?" "Because I have been watching you these past few days," Catherine admitted. "I have been watching your husband with that little boy, and I realized something. Robert does not want a son. He wants property. He wants to prove that he can take back what he thinks belongs to him. But that child does not belong to him. He belongs with you and with Mr. Yancy." "Thank you," Marcy whispered. "Thank you so much." "Do not thank me," Catherine said. "Just promise me you will take care of him. Promise me he will have a good life." "I promise," Marcy said. "He will have the best life we can give him." Catherine nodded and turned to leave. At the door she paused. "For what it is worth, I think my brother was a fool. You seem like a good woman. I hope you find happiness here." Then she was gone, and Marcy sank into a chair, shaking with relief. When Kade came home that evening and she told him what had happened, he held her close and let her cry tears of gratitude and release. "It is over," he murmured into her hair. "It is really over now." And it was. The threat of Robert finding them faded and life returned to normal. The years passed peacefully. Thomas grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved helping Kade at the forge. Emma was quieter, more studious, with a talent for drawing that delighted her parents. In 1888, Marcy gave birth to another son, whom they named Jacob. And 2 years after that, another daughter arrived, Rose. Their house was loud and chaotic and wonderful. Kade would sometimes stand in the doorway and watch his family, marveling at how full his life had become. Thomas never questioned that Kade was his father. As far as the boy was concerned, Kade had always been there, and that was the truth that mattered. On Thomas's 10th birthday in 1893, Kade took him aside for a talk. The boy was old enough now, and Kade felt he deserved to know the truth about his origins. "There is something I need to tell you," Kade said as they sat on the porch together. "Something important about your birth." Thomas looked at him with solemn eyes so like Marcy's. "What is it, Papa?" "I am not your father by blood," Kade said gently. "Your mother was with another man before she met me. That man was your birth father, but he did not want to be part of your life. So I became your father instead when you were just a baby." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. "Does that mean you do not really love me?" he finally asked, his voice small. "No," Kade said fiercely, pulling the boy close. "It means exactly the opposite. I chose to love you. I chose to be your father. And that choice means everything. You are mine, Thomas. You have always been mine from the moment I first held you. Blood does not make a family, love does." "Then it does not matter," Thomas said, hugging Kade tightly. "You are my papa. That is all I need to know." Kade felt tears in his eyes as he held his son. "I love you, boy, more than anything." "I love you too, Papa," Thomas said. They sat together in comfortable silence, and Kade felt a deep sense of peace. This was his family. These were his children. And nothing, not blood or past or circumstance, could change that. As the years continued to pass, the Yancy family became a fixture in Oatman. Kade's blacksmith shop was the best in the region, and Thomas began learning the trade when he was 12. Emma became a teacher at the town school, despite her young age, assisting the older teacher and eventually taking over when he retired. Jacob and Rose were still young, but they were growing fast. each with their own personalities and dreams. Marcy thrived as a mother and wife. The scared, desperate woman who had stumbled into town all those years ago was gone, replaced by a confident, happy woman who was deeply loved and respected in the community. She ran a small business from their home, sewing fine dresses for the women of Oatman and the surrounding towns. Her work was sought after and she took pride in her skill. In 1895, when Thomas was 12, he asked Marcy about his birth father for the first time. They were sitting together while she sewed, and the question came out of nowhere. "Mama, do you ever think about him? My real father?" Marcy's hands stilled on her work. "He is not your real father," she said gently. "Kade is your real father." "You know what I mean," Thomas said. "The man who gave me life." Marcy set down her sewing and looked at her son. He was growing tall with Kade's strong build and her features. "Sometimes I think about him," she admitted. "But not in the way you might imagine. I think about what he lost by walking away. I think about how he will never know the wonderful boy you have become. And mostly, I am grateful that things worked out the way they did because it led me to your father." "To Kade. You love Papa?" Thomas asked. "More than I can possibly express," Marcy said. "He saved us, Thomas. He saved both of us, and he did it asking nothing in return. That is the kind of man your father is." Thomas nodded, seeming satisfied with this answer. "I am glad he found us." "So am I," Marcy said, pulling him into a hug. "So am I." The turn of the century brought changes to Oatman and to the Yancy family. The mining boom that had sustained the town began to slow. Many families moved away, looking for opportunities elsewhere. But Kade and Marcy stayed, their roots now too deep to pull up easily. Thomas, now 17, was a skilled blacksmith in his own right. He had also developed an interest in mechanics, fascinated by the few automobiles that were beginning to appear in the territory. Emma, 15, was still teaching and had started writing stories in her spare time, dreams of becoming a published author dancing in her head. Jacob, at 12, was the family's adventurer, always exploring the desert and coming home with rocks and stories. Rose, 10, was as sweet and gentle as her name, with a talent for music that suggested she might become quite accomplished if given the opportunity. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Kade surprised Marcy with a trip to Phoenix. It was the farthest either of them had traveled in years, and they left the children in Emma's capable care for a week. In Phoenix, Kade bought Marcy a necklace with a small ruby pendant, using money he had been saving for months. "It is too much," Marcy protested, though her eyes shone with delight. "Nothing is too much for you," Kade said, fastening it around her neck. "You have given me everything. A family, a home, a reason to get up in the morning. This is a small token of how much you mean to me." They stood together in their hotel room, and Marcy reached up to kiss him. "I love you," she said. "I have loved you for so long that I cannot remember what life was like before you." "I hope you never have to remember," Kade said, holding her close. "I hope we have decades more together." They did have decades. They grew old together in their house in Oatman, watching their children grow into adults and start families of their own. Thomas married a girl from a neighboring town, a kind woman named Helen who loved him deeply and gave them 3 grandchildren. Emma never married, choosing instead to pursue her writing career, and became a moderately successful novelist known for her stories about frontier life. Jacob became a surveyor, traveling throughout the Arizona territory mapping land. Rose married a doctor and moved to Tucson, where she raised 4 children and became known for her charitable work. Through it all, Kade and Marcy remained the center of their family. Their house became the gathering place for holidays and celebrations, always full of laughter and love and the chaos of multiple generations. Kade taught his grandsons his trade, just as he had taught Thomas. Marcy sewed dresses for her granddaughters and told them stories about the old days. In 1910, on a cool October evening, Kade and Marcy sat on their porch watching the sunset, just as they had done countless times before. They were both in their 50s now, their hair streaked with gray, their faces lined with the marks of a life well lived. "You ever regret it?" Kade asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Staying in Oatman, we could have gone anywhere, done anything." "Never," Marcy said firmly, taking his hand. "This is where we built our life. This is where we raised our children. Why would I regret that?" "Sometimes I wonder if you wanted more," Kade admitted. "You were meant for greater things than a small town in Arizona." "I have everything I ever wanted right here," Marcy said. She squeezed his hand. "You gave me that, Kade. When I stumbled into this town broken and afraid, you gave me hope. You gave me love. You gave Thomas a father when no one else would. You are my everything." "You are mine too," Kade said softly. "I never thought I would have a family. I never thought anyone would love me. And then you appeared like a miracle and everything changed." They sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and pink. Thomas had ridden over earlier and promised to bring the grandchildren by the next day. Emma had sent a letter saying she would be visiting for Christmas. Jacob was due back from a surveying expedition any day now. Rose had written about her youngest's first lost tooth. Their family had grown and spread, but it all traced back to this moment, to this porch, to two people who had found each other when they needed it most. A desperate woman with a child who was not his. A lonely man who had said those magic words. "Now the child is ours." And from that simple declaration, a lifetime of love had bloomed. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Kade pulled Marcy close. She rested her head on his shoulder, and they sat in perfect contentment. Two people who had found their home in each other's hearts. The years continued to roll by, bringing both joy and sorrow as all years do. In 1915, Thomas took over the blacksmith shop completely, as Kade's hands had grown too stiff with arthritis to work the forge effectively. Kade still went by every day, offering advice and enjoying watching his son work. Thomas had inherited his skill and his patience, and Kade was immensely proud of the man he had become. Emma's novels had gained a wider readership, and she traveled occasionally to give talks at libraries and women's clubs. But she always came home to Oatman, to the small house she had bought near her parents. She never regretted not marrying, finding fulfillment in her work and her family. Jacob married late, at 35, to a widow with 2 children of her own. He adopted her children without hesitation, and Kade saw himself reflected in his son's actions. The cycle continued, love creating families where biology alone could not. Rose's children brought fresh energy to family gatherings. Her oldest son wanted to be a blacksmith like his grandfather and great-uncle, while her daughters were interested in medicine and law, ambitions that would have been impossible for women just a generation before. In 1920, Kade fell seriously ill with pneumonia. For weeks, his life hung in the balance and Marcy rarely left his side. Their children gathered, fearing the worst, but Kade was stubborn, and with Marcy's constant care and the attention of a good doctor, he pulled through. "You cannot leave me yet," Marcy told him as he recovered. "We have too much living left to do." "I am not going anywhere," Kade promised, his voice still weak. "I told you we would have decades together. I intend to keep that promise." He did keep it. Kade and Marcy celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1925, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The celebration was held at their home, which had been expanded and improved over the years, but still retained its essential character. It was a place of warmth and welcome, where everyone knew they belonged. At the party, Thomas stood to make a speech. He was 42 now, a respected member of the community with children nearly grown. But when he looked at Kade, his eyes held the same love and admiration they had held when he was a boy. "My father is not the man who gave me life," Thomas said, his voice carrying across the crowded room. "But he is the man who gave me everything that matters. He taught me how to work hard, how to treat others with respect, how to be a good husband and father. He showed me that love is not about blood or biology. It is about showing up every single day and choosing to be there. Papa, you chose me when you had no reason to. You chose our whole family. And that choice changed everything. I hope I can be half the man you are." Kade was crying openly by the time Thomas finished, and he was not the only one. The whole room was wiping at tears. Kade stood, moving more slowly than he once had, and embraced his son. "You are already more than I ever was," Kade said. "You are my greatest accomplishment, Thomas. You and your siblings. You are my legacy." Marcy watched from her seat, her own tears flowing freely. She thought about that day so long ago when she had stumbled into Oatman, desperate and afraid, and convinced her life was over. She thought about the kind stranger who had offered her water and help without asking for anything in return. She thought about how that moment had blossomed into this. 4 children, 12 grandchildren, and 5 great-grandchildren so far, all because one man had seen someone in need and decided to help. That night, after all the guests had gone home and they were alone in their house, Kade and Marcy lay in bed together. "Thank you," Marcy said softly. "For what?" Kade asked. "For everything," Marcy said. "For saving me, for loving Thomas, for giving me a life I never imagined I could have." "I should be thanking you," Kade said. "Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions of life without really living it. You gave me purpose. You gave me a reason to be better." "We saved each other," Marcy said simply. "Yes," Kade agreed. "We did." They drifted off to sleep, hands clasped together, just as they had done for 40 years. The 1920s brought more changes to Oatman. The town, which had been declining for years, found new life as a tourist stop on Route 66. The Yancy family adapted with the times. Thomas began doing work on automobiles in addition to his blacksmithing, and the business thrived. Emma's novels found a new audience among travelers passing through, and she set up a small display in the general store selling signed copies. Kade and Marcy, now in their 70s, watched the changes with interest but did not participate much. Their days had slowed down, filled with simple pleasures. They tended a garden together. They read books Emma sent them. They spent time with their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, passing on stories of the old days. In 1928, Marcy received a letter that surprised her. It was from a lawyer in St. Louis, informing her that Robert Thornhill had died and left a small bequest to his son, Thomas. The letter included a brief note from Robert himself, written shortly before his death. "I was wrong about many things," Robert had written. "But I was most wrong about my son. I thought I could walk away and forget, but I never forgot. I followed your life from afar as much as I could. I know Thomas grew up well, that he has a good life and a good family. I am glad he had a real father in Kade Yancy. I am sorry I was not that man. Please tell Thomas that I am sorry and that I hope he can forgive me, even though I do not deserve it." Marcy showed the letter to Kade, unsure how to feel. "Should I tell Thomas?" she asked. "That is up to you," Kade said. "But I think he has a right to know. He is a grown man. He can decide for himself what this means to him." Marcy did tell Thomas, giving him both the letter and the information about the bequest. Thomas read the letter several times, his expression unreadable. "It does not change anything," he finally said. "Kade Yancy is my father. That has never been in question. But I appreciate knowing that Robert regretted his choices. It gives me some closure, I suppose." He donated the money from Robert's bequest to the local school, establishing a fund for children whose families could not afford supplies. "If any good can come from Robert Thornhill," Thomas said, "let it be this." Kade was proud of his son's grace and generosity. Thomas had grown into the kind of man who made the world better, and Kade could ask for no better legacy than that. The 1930s brought the Depression, and Oatman suffered along with the rest of the country. The mining industry collapsed completely, and many businesses closed. But the Yancy family held together, supporting each other through the hard times. Thomas's work on automobiles kept them afloat, as people needed repairs even when they could not afford new vehicles. Emma's writing provided some income as well, though publishing had slowed down. Kade and Marcy, now in their 80s, worried about their children and grandchildren. But they also marveled at how the family pulled together. Thomas shared what he had with his siblings. Emma sent money when she could. Jacob found work surveying for government projects. Rose's husband, the doctor, treated family members for free. They were a unit, bound together by love and loyalty. "We raised good children," Kade said to Marcy one evening as they sat together. "We did," Marcy agreed. "They know what really matters." In 1935, Kade suffered a stroke. He survived, but his left side was weakened and he required constant care. Marcy, despite her own advancing age, refused to let anyone else take primary responsibility for his care. "I have been taking care of this man for 50 years, she said firmly when Thomas suggested hiring a nurse. "I am not stopping now." She bathed him, helped him dress, walked with him when he needed to move around. Kade hated being dependent, but he also knew he was fortunate to have a wife who loved him so completely. They had always been partners, and they remained partners even now. "I am sorry," Kade said one day as Marcy helped him into a clean shirt. "I am sorry you have to do all this." "Sorry for what?" Marcy asked. "Kade, you have spent our entire marriage taking care of me. Let me take care of you now." "I wanted to grow old gracefully," Kade said. "I wanted to still be strong for you." "You are strong," Marcy said. "Strength is not just in your muscles, Kade. It is in your heart, and your heart has always been the strongest thing about you." They continued on day by day. Kade improved somewhat with time and therapy, regaining some use of his left arm and leg. He would never be what he was, but he was alive and present, and that was what mattered. In 1938, they celebrated their 53rd wedding anniversary. It was a quieter celebration than their 40th had been, just immediate family gathered in their home. But it was no less meaningful. 3 generations sat around their table, sharing food and stories and love. 53 years, Emma marveled. "That is a lifetime." "It is our lifetime," Kade said, squeezing Marcy's hand with his good right hand. "And I would not change a single moment of it." As the evening wound down and family members began to leave, Thomas lingered. He sat with Kade and Marcy, holding his own grandchild now, a baby girl named after Marcy. "Papa," Thomas said, using the name he had called Kade since childhood. "I want you to know something. I want you to know that you were the best father any son could ask for. You gave me everything I needed to become who I am. I could not have asked for more." "You made it easy," Kade said, his words slightly slurred from the stroke but his meaning clear. "You were a good boy who grew into a good man. I am proud to call you my son." They sat together in comfortable silence, 3 generations bound by love rather than blood. It was the perfect summation of everything Kade and Marcy had built together. Marcy passed away peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1940. She was 82 years old, and she had lived a full, rich life surrounded by people who loved her. But for Kade, her death was devastating. They had been together for 55 years, partners in every sense of the word. Without her, he felt unmoored. Thomas moved his father into his own home, refusing to let Kade grieve alone. Emma came to stay for several weeks, helping to care for her father and simply being present. Jacob and Rose visited as often as they could. The family rallied around Kade, just as he had rallied around them so many times before. Slowly, painfully, Kade found a way to live with his grief. He knew Marcy would not want him to give up, to simply fade away, so he kept going. He played with his great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their great-grandmother. He gave Thomas advice about the business when asked. He sat on Thomas's porch and watched the world go by, remembering all the moments he and Marcy had shared. One afternoon, a few months after Marcy's death, Thomas found Kade sitting with an old photograph. It showed Marcy as she had been when she first arrived in Oatman, young and frightened but with a strength in her eyes that had never faded. "I miss her," Kade said simply. "We all do," Thomas said, sitting beside his father. "But Papa, look at what she left behind. Look at all of us. We exist because she stumbled into Oatman and you decided to help her. Because you chose to love her and me when you had no obligation to do so. That is her legacy. That is your legacy." Love. Kade looked around at his family, seeing the truth in Thomas's words. Marcy lived on in their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren. She lived on in every act of kindness they showed, every moment of love they shared. She was not gone, not really. She was woven into the fabric of their family, as permanent and essential as the threads in one of her quilts. "You are right," Kade said, his voice stronger. "She is still here, in all of you." Kade lived for 2 more years, surrounded by family and love. He was there when Thomas's first great-grandchild graduated from high school. He was there when Emma's final novel was published, a sweeping story of frontier life that became her most successful work. He was there when Jacob's adopted son opened his own business. He was there when Rose's daughter became a lawyer, breaking barriers and making her family proud. On a warm afternoon in June 1942, Kade sat on Thomas's porch with his son beside him. They did not speak much, just enjoyed each other's company. As the sun began to set, Kade felt a peace settle over him that he had not felt since Marcy died. "Thomas," he said quietly, "I want you to know something. Choosing to be your father was the best decision I ever made. Everything good in my life came from that choice." "I know, Papa," Thomas said, tears in his eyes. "I know." That night, Kade Yancy passed away in his sleep. He was 85 years old and he had lived a life full of love and purpose. His funeral was attended by dozens of people, all of them touched by his kindness and generosity in some way. Thomas gave the eulogy, his voice breaking as he spoke about the man who had raised him. "My father taught me that family is not about blood," he said. "It is about choice. It is about showing up and doing the work and loving people even when it is hard. He chose me when I was not his. He chose my mother when she was broken and scared. And from those choices, he built a family that will endure for generations. That is the kind of man Kade Yancy was. That is the legacy he leaves behind." Kade was buried beside Marcy in the small cemetery outside Oatman. Their headstones were simple, listing their names and dates, but there was one additional line on Kade's stone, added by Thomas. "He chose love, and love chose him back." The years rolled on, and the Yancy family continued to grow and thrive. Thomas passed the blacksmith shop down to his son, who modernized it into a full auto repair garage. Emma's novels remained in print, studied in universities as examples of authentic frontier literature. Jacob's surveying work helped shape the development of Arizona. Rose's children carried on her tradition of service, becoming doctors and teachers and advocates for those in need. And through it all, the story of Kade and Marcy lived on. It was told to each new generation, a reminder of where they came from and what they stood for. The story of a desperate woman who arrived with a child that was not his, and a kind man who said, "Now the child is ours." That simple declaration had changed everything. It had created a family, built a legacy, and proved that love was always stronger than circumstance. Thomas grew old telling the story to his grandchildren, who told it to their grandchildren, passing down the values that Kade and Marcy had embodied. In 2010, on what would have been Kade and Marcy's 125th wedding anniversary, the Yancy family gathered in Oatman for a reunion. Over 200 people attended, all descended from that original choice Kade had made in 1883. They came from all over the country, doctors and lawyers and teachers and mechanics and artists and soldiers and mothers and fathers and everything in between. Thomas's great-great-grandson, also named Kade, stood before the crowd and shared the story one more time. He told it exactly as it had been passed down, preserving every detail. When he finished, he held up a photograph of Kade and Marcy, taken on their 50th wedding anniversary. "This is where we come from," he said. "This is who we are. We are the family that was built on a choice to love, and that choice echoes through every generation. So when you go home, remember this story. Remember that family is not just who you are born to. It is who chooses you and who you choose in return. That is the lesson our ancestors left us. That is the Yancy legacy." The crowd erupted in applause, and several people wiped tears from their eyes. They spent the rest of the day sharing stories, connecting with distant relatives, and celebrating the family that Kade and Marcy had built from nothing but love and determination. As the sun set over Oatman that evening, painting the sky in the same colors Kade and Marcy had watched so many times, the family gathered at the cemetery. They stood before the two simple headstones, and together they sang an old hymn that Marcy had loved. It was a perfect ending to a perfect day, a celebration of a love story that had started with a simple act of kindness and grown into something magnificent. A woman had come with a child that was not his. A cowboy had said, "Now the child is ours." And from those words, a legacy of love was born that would endure forever. The desert wind blew gently across the cemetery, and for just a moment, it seemed to carry with it the echo of laughter and the whisper of promises kept. Kade and Marcy were gone, but they were not forgotten. They lived on in every kind act, every brave choice, every moment of love shared by their descendants. And somewhere, perhaps, they were together again, sitting on a porch and watching a sunset, their hands clasped tight, their hearts full, their love eternal.